no one's forgotten the notorious Salem witch trials.
The witch trials really lasted only about 15 months from the first accusations, till the final release, but it was very famous throughout the country because it was really the only place in America where there's an outbreak of witchcraft to the extent that, we had here, unlike in Europe.
Surprisingly, they are only a speck on the timeline of American history. But in Salem, one case in particular would have an everlasting effect and spawn the curse of the Salem sheriff. It all began 300 years ago when a handful of teenage girls accused various members of the community of witchcraft. Over 150 people were imprisoned, 20 were put to death, including one old man who suffered the cruelest fate, Giles Corey.
Giles Corey had been married 3 times. His wife was accused of witchcraft. He went to the court pleading for her, saying he wanted to die with her. Well, the accusing girls, accommodated him by saying he was a witch too, and that they had dreams about him killing his former wives.
Giles Corey surprised everyone by pleading neither innocent nor guilty. With his silence, he had, in fact, signed his own death warrant. And the penalty under English law was execution by stoning.
They took him out into a field not far from the jail. They lay him down, they start putting heavy weights on him. The idea was to torture him to the point where he would cooperate with the court or die.
The man in charge of the execution was Sheriff Corwin, known throughout Salem for his brutality. As the sheriff ordered more rocks, Giles Corey never uttered a sound, never admitted guilt. And they say legal documents of the era might explain his silence.
One of the reasons that he chose to stand mute is that if you were convicted of witchcraft, your property was confiscated. And he had deeded his property over to his sons-in-law and daughters, and he didn't want those transfers to be negated if he was convicted. And he probably also knew that he was going to die. I mean, really hardly anybody was ever found innocent.
As the sheriff looked on, his deputies continued the agonizing torture, piling on one heavy stone after another. After hours of pain-racking torment, Giles Corey could take no more. His silence was finally broken.
Supposedly the thing they said was more weight. He just wanted to get it over with. The torture was obviously very, very intense. His bones would break, his organs would quit work, blood would probably start, oozing out of all its, aperture. So really a very violent death. He just wanted to get it over with.
Unmoved by the dying man's request and frustrated at not hearing an admission of guilt, Sheriff Corwin showed yet another side of his inhumanity. When Giles Corey was moments away from death, he slowly opened his mouth.
They said towards the end his tongue came out of his mouth just from the pressure of the weight, and the bodily organs were being crushed.
Sheriff Corwin got up on top of the rocks and with his cane stuck poor Giles Corey's tongue back down his throat.
That action alone gave rise to Giles Corey's very last words. Words that would echo through the streets of Salem for the next 300 years.
And that is about the time that Giles Corey said, "I curse you, Sheriff, and I curse Salem."
Soon after, Sheriff Corwin died of a sudden heart attack. And so began the legend of the curse of the Salem Sheriff. But the story doesn't end there. As the years went on, it got stranger and stranger. Since 1692, every single person who has held the position of High Sheriff in Salem has suffered either a heart or blood-related illness.
Sheriff Riddens had hypertension. Sheriff Wells and Sheriff Wells' son, who were both sheriffs, died of heart attacks, and one had a stroke before that. And Sheriff Casey also died of a heart attack He was an intern sheriff back in the middle 60s.
We found one survivor. Sheriff Robert Cahill never believed in the curse until it was almost too late.
One day, everything kind of froze up. My arm, I couldn't speak. It was like a stroke, but they didn't diagnose it as a stroke at first and said it was a blood disease of some sort.
Months later, doctors made another disturbing discovery.
Part of my aorta valve had split off, got lodged in my head, and I had to go through open heart surgery.
He was forced to retire at age 44, and for the first time, Robert Cahill paid attention to the curse of the Salem sheriff.
I realized that the sheriff before me had this terrible blood disease, basically sugar diabetes. He lost his toes, his feet. That the sheriff before him had a heart attack. The sheriff before him had a heart attack.
And if you think Cahill is being an alarmist, even the current sheriff would rather be safe than sorry when it comes to the curse. And for good reason.
I had my stroke test the other day at the jail, and I got a pretty good report. My blood pressure was a little high, but all the sheriffs worry about the curse.
And as for the old Salem jail where so many suffered, well, it still stands. Although today, it's empty. Some say that that's a good thing. Locals hope that by building their new jail just around the corner, they may have broken the curse. But curse or no curse, Giles Corey is still a big presence in this town. There are reports of his ghost wandering the Howard Street Cemetery where he was mercilessly crushed to death. Perhaps he is reliving his execution or simply keeping his eye on the current Sheriff of Salem. Coming up, a woman scorned plans her revenge in the hereafter. We'll tell you why this tombstone bears the stamp of a grave injustice. The state of Maine is known as Vacation Land, and for good reason. It hosts visitors year-round with sailing, swimming, skiing, and then, of course, there's the lobster. But Maine also has a few ghost stories of its own. About 19 miles south of Bangor is Bucksport. Once a thriving coastal community, it is now a modest paper mill town. But Bucksport has a shady history. Inspired by Jonathan Buck, a New England pioneer who today is remembered not for what he did in his life, but for what happened after his death. According to legend, the marking on his tomb is no mere flaw in the stone. It's a curse on his grave.
Jonathan Buck was a colonel in the Revolutionary War. He also was the founder of Buckstown. He built the first schooner that sailed the Penobscot River, and he built the first sawmill, and he had the first successful settlement in this area.
Apparently, Colonel Buck was also an adulterer. They say in the dead of night, he would sneak away to visit a local woman named Ida Black.
He apparently was seen sort of tiptoeing away from wherever she lived. And when we confronted with it, came up with a story, I think she might be a witch, and that he was spying on her to gather evidence. You know, this being the 1700s, not too far removed from Salem, the story just went out of control, and people wanted to try this woman for being a witch. And Colonel Buck was left with a very moral decision to make. Does he come clean? I was having an affair with a woman, she really isn't a witch, or does he keep his mouth shut and let her pay whatever consequences she might pay?
Colonel Buck chose to keep quiet, and Ida Black was accused of being a witch. In a wrenching trial for which her only defense would have branded her an adulteress, the townspeople quickly passed judgment.
She's guilty. Guilty. She's a witch. Hang her! Hang the witch!
The punishment was harsh. Ida Black was condemned to die by hanging. On that fateful day, Colonel Buck and his wife joined the many members of the community who came out to witness the execution.
He had a heart of stone. He was pious, religious. She begged for her life, and he just turned away from her, basically to cover his own tracks.
But moments before Colonel Buck walked away from Ida Black, she did something that would haunt this town forever.
She turns to Jonathan Buck, raises her hand, and says, "Listen well, Jonathan Buck, for these are the last words I shall speak. Soon you will die, and over your grave they will erect a large stone where everyone will see your bones crumbling into dust. And on that stone my leg will appear, and all people near and far will know that you murdered an innocent woman."
It was the ultimate curse. Ida Black was threatening to dance on the colonel's grave for all eternity. But Jonathan Buck was unmoved. He simply turned away, and moments later, Ida Black was hanged. For years, it looked like nothing would come of the scorned woman's final words. In fact, Colonel Buck lived a full life, dying at the age of 76. His passing was mourned by the town, and he was laid to rest here in this cemetery on Main Street. Jonathan Buck remained a prominent figure in the community.
His descendants decided that the founder of the town really needed something a little more ostentatious, and so they put up this stone monument.
Within a few years, something unexplainable happened. A shape began to appear on the stone. It was the shape of a woman's leg. And for the townspeople, the words of Ida Black echoed out of the past.
They're very squarely in front of you where you can't mistake it as that black outline of a woman's foot.
The family was stunned, and then, as people began to talk, they did everything they could to get rid of the obvious imprint.
The stories are that it's been removed, it's been replaced, that the outline has been cleansed, and each time that it was cleansed, the image would come back very distinctly. There were stonemasons that went out there and professionally tried to cleanse the surface of this monument to remove the outline of the foot. And any time that happened, of course, it came back. The rational explanation for this is that this is an iron ore deposit in this granite, and then when it oxidizes, when it hits the air, it turns color. The other explanation is that the Witch of Bucksport is dancing on Colonel Buck's grave.
But Ida Black didn't just leave her mark on Jonathan Buck's grave. She left it on the community as well. Locals say she still refuses to leave her lover alone. Often at night, her ghost has been seen pacing through the cemetery, seeking out Jonathan Buck's headstone. One night, 35 years ago, Bill Sheehan was living in this very house that overlooked the cemetery when he saw something he will never forget.
Well, I was getting ready for bed and looking out through the bedroom window down towards the cemetery, and I saw this haze in there, and I began to look, and it was in the form of a female or a person, and kind of just floating over the cemetery towards the Buck Monument.
According to Bill, Ida Black continues to haunt the Main Street Cemetery, usually in the fall.
Well, I always thought possibly she was hunting for her leg, or actually she was checking to see that Jonathan was still in his grave.
Is Ida Black checking to see if the curse is still in effect? Or despite being scorned and murdered, is she mourning the death of her former lover and accuser? That's become the consensus in this town, especially after another cryptic sign appeared on the gravestone some 50 years ago.
Sometime in the late 1950s and the early 1960s, a heart began to appear, and it is assumed that it is the heart of Ida Black because she loved Jonathan Buck, and so she gives her heart to him.
Very distinct under the name Buck. This outline bleeds right under the name. Very distinct. The outline of a woman's leg and foot. Just above it, a broken heart.
With those two shapes indelibly branded on Jonathan Buck's grave, Tom Field thinks Ida is simply indulging in some poetic license.
I think that there's a real comparison here with the Scarlet Letter. Just as Hester Prynne was forced to wear the Scarlet A upon her breast for the sin of adultery, I think Colonel Jonathan Buck bears this leg upon his monument for committing the same crime. It's very much like the Scarlet Letter, but it's Maine's version with maybe a little darker twist.
Next, we go behind the scenes of this haunted manor and see just how the other half lives. And we don't mean the rich and powerful. The homes of New England range from Massachusetts' signature Cape Cods to Rhode Island's lavish mansions. In fact, we found a home on Newport's Millionaires Row that's rife with all kinds of supernatural activity. Just before the turn of the last century, Newport became the ritzy summer playground for the rich and powerful. A place where the Astors and the Vanderbilts ruled the East Coast social set with an iron fist. The Newport summer mansions on Bellevue Avenue pay homage to that unspoiled Gilded Age. And today, thousands visit annually to see how the other half once lived. One top attraction is Belcourt Castle. Built by Richard Morris Hunt, the high society architect who designed Newport's more notable mansions, Belcourt Castle is one of the 3 largest estates in Newport. Belcourt was one of the first mansions on the block to be rejuvenated, and one of the first places to host dinners to the general public. Owners Harley and Donald Tinney have lived in this 100-year-old mansion since 1956. And they claim there's more here than just history.
There are about 8 or 9 ghosts that reside in Belcourt Castle.
And some of those ghosts have brought their dark pasts with them. Harley gave us an exclusive tour of Belcourt to show us some of the extraordinary things that happen every day. We begin in one of the rooms she claims is most active. The ballroom.
This is the room where I had my most frightening experience of all the 40 years I've been in Belcourt.
The reason for the scare? Well, it seems to be attributed to this particular suit of armor. Here's what happened late one night.
When I got to about here, I heard the most unbearable scream or frightening noise that I had heard. Stopped me dead in my track.
The horrifying sound was coming from this part of the room, where the vast collection of armor is on display. As Harley stood frozen, she heard it again. And then again.
The third scream, as I was right here, was terrifying. I ran. I didn't stop this time. And I ran to get into the apartment over there.
So why would an antique bellow into the darkness? Well, the armor, an import from Italy, was likely worn to fight some very bloody battles during the 16th century. And here's a secret. While the armor survived whatever terrible clashes it may have been a part of, the warrior probably didn't. On close inspection of the helmet, there is evidence of a blinding and ultimately fatal blow to the head. A desperate moment that is lived out day after day and shared with those who possess the suit of steel.
It is an agony. It is an agony. and it starts with a very low guttural and ends up in a shriek. It's very difficult to describe, but it's horrifying.
But cursed armor is not the only antique with a mysterious past at Belcourt. By all appearances, this 17th century wood carving of a monk looks like a simple statue. But here they say it is anything but.
What many people have reported is a man with a long brown robe and a hat. We haven't seen a face. And it generally walks in the area where the statue is. One time, Donald and I both saw it. It walked from the foyer, right across the Grand Hall, right into the ladies' room.
So what's the secret behind the mysterious events inside the castle? Ghost hunters believe that the answer does not lie in what once may have happened in this pricey piece of real estate. Instead, they say items may be cursed by the former owners, and then the curses are imported into the home with the purchase of the antiques.
When you have any object, whether it be a human being, a cat, a suit of armor, this thing has an electrical field around it. We ourselves have a DC electrical field around us. As we become attached to certain items, they in a way become part of us. They become part of our electrical field, as it were. And this is what happens with the objects. They're brought into our sphere, our consciousness, and they are still connected with the consciousness of the people who loved them before this. So therefore, the haunting.
And since Belcourt's 60-odd rooms are decorated with rare items from all over the world, experts believe they have ghosts from just about everywhere, each with its own personal, provocative history.
I think sometimes the house owns us and not the other way around. That's because whatever happens here happens with direction and a reason.
When we come back, Boston's darkest hour, the curse that turned a field of dreams into a sports fan's ultimate nightmare. In New England, the first day of spring is marked not by a date on the calendar or the bursting of new flowers, but rather by the crack of a baseball bat. And in Boston, everyone seems to be a fan of the Red Sox.
A Red Sox fan is neurotic. A Red Sox fan is faithful. A Red Sox fan is skeptical. A Red Sox fan is all of the above.
You have to be a Red Sox fan if you live in Boston. It's just the rule, the way it goes. Boston, Bruins, Red Sox, Patriots, and Celtics. You have to.
But when the baseball season opens here, everyone holds their breath, and for good reason. Committed fans ride an emotional roller coaster. One moment, victory is within reach. The next moment, crushing, agonizing defeat.
Every year, when spring training starts, we're filled with hope, and then our hopes get dashed, but hope springs eternal in Boston.
They say there's a reason that the Red Sox are the ultimate underdog. It's not for lack of skill, talent, or fan support. It all boils down to the curse. The curse of the Bambino.
The curse basically explains why the Red Sox have never been able to win the World Series since Babe Ruth was sold to the New York Yankees.
It was 1920, the birth of a new era, and the decade was about to roar. Skirts were getting shorter, morals were getting looser, prohibition was right around the corner, and baseball was the only game in town. At Fenway Park, George Herman Ruth was making his own history. With the Babe at bat, the Bo Sox turned in 4 World Series wins. They were on top of the world. The Babe was unstoppable. Then one day, it all ended. On January 3rd, 1920, Babe Ruth was sold to Boston's arch-rival, the New York Yankees, for the princely sum of $125,000. Why? Well, owner Harry Frazee wanted to finance his girlfriend's Broadway career, and he needed cash. The play was a success, but it was curtains for the Red Sox.
It was kind of the original sin of baseball to have taken its best player, best pitcher, best hitter, and sold him for cash. It's almost as if the franchise itself is being punished for this original sin of selling the best player the game ever knew.
It would almost be the equivalent of selling the Liberty Bell, in my opinion. I mean, we sold not only the greatest baseball player that ever lived, but also part of American history.
And since that day, a dark cloud has hung over New England's baseball franchise. And the reason may be tied directly to the Sultan of Swat. They say the Babe felt so betrayed by the trade that on the train bound for New York, he did the unthinkable.
He didn't want to play for the Yankees. He really liked it here in Boston. So he decided supposedly to curse the Red Sox and have them never win the World Series again. And they haven't.
What happened in the years to come has become part of New England and baseball legend. Dramatic, climactic World Series losses and near misses, one after another. 1946 World Series, the Sox lose in Game 7. 1967 World Series, they lose in Game 7. 1975, you guessed it, Game 7. Then, 1986, Boston fans held their breath. But the alleged curse triumphed yet again.
The Red Sox were about to close out. There's an easy ground ball to Bill Buckner that went right through his legs into the outfield, and the winning run came across for the Mets.
But it's not just fans who believe in the curse. Even the players live and die by it.
I've seen it. I've seen the curse, and we have done everything we could to get rid of the curse, but it seems to prevail.
And if all of this seems a little over the top, keep in mind, no team in the league has come so close so often, only to have it slip through their fingers each and every time.
The curse will always prevail. No matter how close the Red Sox think they're going to get, in spite of what happened in the past, they'll never get over the top. That is the curse, but we can break the curse. Pedro said we can break the curse.
In Boston, they call it reversing the curse, and there have been numerous attempts to do just that, each one more outlandish than the next. Devoted fan Kevin Kennedy went so far as to convince a team of people to scour Willis Pond in Sudbury, Massachusetts, for a piano believed to have been tossed in by the Bambino after a night of partying.
Perhaps if we restore it, the baseball gods will look favorably upon us and grant us a World Series win, and this could be the year.
Kevin and the team, many of them Red Sox fans, have spent over 2 years and counting, but their search has left them empty-handed so far. And meanwhile, the curse continues. But that hasn't stopped others from coming up with creative ideas to make the Sox hex-free.
We have to dig up the body of Babe Ruth. We have to bring him back to Boston. We have to put him up in a uniform and rub his head like Don Zimmer, and maybe things will happen.
So will die-hard Sox fans ever find the key to reversing the curse? No one really knows, but that doesn't stop them from keeping their fingers crossed and begging the Babe to forgive and forget.
Babe, I'm asking you straight out, and I'm sure I've got a lot of hundreds, thousands, millions of Red Sox fans backing me. Whatever you do, please, just lift the curse.
When we return, a scary double whammy, the curse of the desert of Maine, and the secret behind the Bennington Triangle. The landscape of Maine is typical Northeast. Tall pines and fir trees, lush greenery, rolling hills. But smack dab in the middle of all of this agriculture is a former farm in the town of Freeport whose 150-year-old curse has created a tourist attraction known as the Desert of Maine.
Almost surreal. Amid all the pine trees and forests and everything else, you find this patch of desert sand in the middle of a forest. It's very odd.
So how on earth could a desert exist so far up in the Northeast? Locals know the answer. It all happened after a woman disavowed a dying man's final wish. The story begins in the early 1800s when William Grayson, a widower and owner of the Tuttle Farm, married Hattie.
The second wife had a son, and he had a son, and they were raising their sons together.
After many years, Thomas Grayson took ill. Before he died, he made Hattie promise that when she died, the farm would go to his son David, not her son Jonah. Thomas mistrusted lawyers, so there are no legal records reflecting his will, but unfortunately, he did trust Hattie.
When she got ready to die, she changed the will and she left it to her son.
It was this final betrayal of her husband's wish that would ruin the farm forever. 14 years after Thomas's death, Hattie noticed a saucer-sized spot of white sand by the barn. 2 weeks later, it turned into a small mound. In a few months, it turned into a dune.
1897, the first patch of sand supposedly was about 8 feet, and year after year, there just was more sand, and by 1919, there were over 50 acres of sand, and the families just up and left.
Over the next 50 years, the desert grew to include 800 acres of valleys and dunes. It was worthless.
Nobody really knew what was happening. They really thought the sand just was bubbling right out of the ground.
The sand eventually covered up buildings, like this spring house which sits under 8 feet of sand. And take a close look at these trees. Actually, these are the tree tops.
This is probably a 40, 50-foot oak tree, and it's half buried. The roots of this oak tree are down here at the level of the land.
Still, it is unusual that of all the farms in Freeport, only this one was buried under sand. And stranger yet, the desert landscape begins and ends within the boundaries of the former Tuttle Farm. But here's another secret. At night, this land turns from cursed to haunted.
It's very spooky if you go out here at night. My sisters and I took a walk after a picnic one day, and we were just going into the woods when the sun went down, and we were so scared. There were so many noises. We were just holding on to each other before we got back out.
Perhaps it's the ghost of Thomas Grayson lamenting his once prosperous farm, or maybe even Hattie, forever ruining the day she broke her promise to a dying man. But whatever's happening here, no one may ever know for sure. About 225 miles from Maine's desert is one of Vermont's most beautiful mountain towns. Sandwiched between New York State and the Berkshires of Massachusetts is Bennington, Vermont, a paradise for the outdoorsy type. Green mountains, lush valleys, and dense forests beckon hikers, climbers, and campers from all over. But don't let all this natural beauty fool you. They say something strange is going on in the foothills of these mountains, in an area known locally as the Bennington Triangle.
The Bennington Triangle is probably one of Vermont's most mysterious and most, in some ways, terrifying areas. It's one of the few places in Vermont that I would really avoid.
Like the infamous Bermuda Triangle, they say the Bennington Triangle is a terrifying vortex in an area known as Glastonbury Mountain. They say it's a cursed black hole, a place where people go never to be seen or heard from again.
For 5 years, between 1945 and 1950, there was a cluster of unexplained disappearances on the slopes of Glastonbury Mountain. People just seemed to step off the edge of the world and vanish forever.
They say the town of Glastonbury sits within a meteorological phenomenon. It's one of the few places on Earth where winds from all 4 directions meet. Native Americans consider that a bad omen. And according to local history, it's easy to believe the area is truly damned.
When white settlers started to move in, they started to suffer from the alleged curse. People would die. Madness seemed to claim more than its share. People would move away. It's a town that failed. Its remains are still there, and it's in that general area that the vanishings took place.
Those vanishings still haunt members of the Bennington community to this day.
There's a lot of rumors and ghost stories and tales about Glastonbury, people missing and never being found.
The first one was in 1945, and it was an experienced hunting and fishing guide by the name of Mitty Rivers. And he was leading a party of hunters up into the mountain, and on the way back, he got a little bit ahead of the 4 people he was guiding, just a little bit ahead on the trail. They never caught up with him. They came around the curve, and he was gone. And he was gone forever.
A few years later, another victim, 8-year-old Paul Jepson.
He couldn't have wandered very far, and he would have been easy to spot because he was wearing a red coat. But he vanished entirely. He was gone.
One interesting footnote, right before Paul vanished without a trace, he'd been acting strangely.
Paul had said that lately he had had a yen to go into the mountains. Can you imagine that? A little 8-year-old boy wanting to go into the mountains? And maybe that's where he went. The fact is, we don't know where he went.
But perhaps the most famous disappearance is that of Paula Weldon. It's a missing persons case that haunts the locals.
Paula Weldon is a name that people still whisper about what happened to her. Paula Weldon was an 18-year-old Bennington college student, and she went on a walk on December 1st, 1946, on the Long Trail and was never seen from again. Never seen, never heard, vanished completely.
Paula's disappearance struck a nerve with the community. Although others had disappeared before her, somehow Paula's story was different.
They thought Mitty Rivers may have fallen down a gulch. Nobody really knew what happened to the little boy. But Paula Weldon, they interviewed her roommates. This girl was not distraught. The only thing that they could really point to was perhaps foul play. And I think it's the first time that the community really started to look at the fact that these weren't coincidental.
Mary Findley remains pragmatic.
There was talk that she dyed her hair and she took off with a young boy that was her boyfriend. I think she could have come to a foul end. However, we'll never know. We'll never know.
Foul play or simply supernatural occurrences?
I think the disappearances are tied together by time and geography. They all happened in the same general area. They all happened within a span of 5 years. And they all happened roughly the same time of the year, October, November, and December. They all happened in those 3 months. They're also tied together because each one becomes more vexing than the last.
Joseph Citro believes these people were not victims of accident or circumstance. He believes they were swallowed up by the curse of the Bennington Triangle.
People will say, well, maybe they fell down wells. Maybe they just crawled under a rock to keep warm and got lost. But 5 people aren't going to fall down 5 different wells. It's unlikely 5 people fell down the same well. And the most unlikely thing of all, to me, is that in all these years, it's been half a century at this point, none of the bodies have ever materialized. None of the cases have ever been solved.
There was no bodies found, no skeletal remains. Where are they, you know? That's my big question.
Mary Findlay still keeps an active file on her desk. She's hoping that perhaps one day she will discover the secrets that lie in the sinister shadows of the mountains of Bennington. In New England, creepy curses seem to flourish and thrive. They say no place is safe from the sometimes threatening and disturbing events that have been known to change people's lives forever.